Hey English 112, you'll have to excuse me, I have a cold, but I just wanted to post a quick video in response to your guys' discussion forum. I just went through it and I made a bunch of like little post-it notes as I was going through with responses, and some of them might be repetitive. A lot of you guys had some similar reactions. Don't get offended if I don't mention you personally. I only mentioned a couple here, but I just wanted to talk about last week's discussion forum on Act 3, right? Act 3's discussion forum. So we were just talking about, is ignorance bliss? And Othello seems to think that it was for him, because he now believes that this affair is occurring and is enraged and jealous and all of these things. So my notes are completely out of order, so they may not make sense, but I just wanted to, chat for a minute about some of the things that I saw. So many of you guys argued in your discussion forum that you would want to know the truth, like you would want to know what was going on, and even though it may not be bliss or whatever. But what's interesting is that, does Othello really seek out the truth, or does he accept what Iago tells him as the truth? Does he seek it out on his own? Does he really want to be not ignorant, or does he just accept kind of what's told to him and the evidence that's given to him without doing his own investigation, right? Because if we just accept what's told to us, is that truly being out of ignorance, or are we just taking what we hear and still ignorant to how to find the truth and what the truth actually is? So that's kind of one question I wanted to pose. And Alexandra kind of touched on that in her reply to Noah, but just something to think about. Also, Timothy mentioned what would Othello do, or could he do, if he had the actual truth, which I thought was interesting. And now I can't read the rest of my notes. But my question is he still existing in actual ignorance? Like, he doesn't know what's really going on. And what would he do if he stepped out of that ignorance and realized how he was being played by Iago, right? So that's one of my notes. And then I made another note that kind of relates to that, but he just says, that Othello says that he wants to be ignorant, but does he? Because he still is, okay? And it certainly is not bliss for him in this moment to be ignorant, because he's easily led by Iago, and in being easily led, he still remains in ignorance, and it's not blissful for him at all. So I think that's interesting. Seeking your own truth is kind of what takes you out of ignorance, isn't it? Okay, I have some other notes here. Jeremy argued that ignorance is bliss because Othello believes that he is pulled from ignorance of the affair, okay? And this just kind of reiterates that whole thing of, well, he is still pretty ignorant, and he doesn't seem to be very blissful, right? Before he let Iago get into his head, he wasn't ignorant. He believed that his wife loved him, and she did, and she wasn't cheating on him, and that was blissful. But when he allowed those seeds of doubt to enter into his brain, and then he starts to accept what someone else is saying as opposed to his wife or Cassio himself, right? He just believes what Iago has to say instead of going that whole straight to the source thing. So that's that whole like believing word of mouth, or I heard you were talking about me. Well, you might have heard that, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's true, right? So, and Othello doesn't even approach anyone. He doesn't approach the people that are actually involved, right, to get the true story until it becomes too late. What else do I want to talk about? Address Othello is actually, I already did that. His ignorance to Othello's. Yeah, so I just mentioned that, you know, his real ignorance, the real ignorance that he is in is his knowledge of what Iago's character is really like, right? And what's going on there. We know because we know his scheming ways, right? And Othello just puts all of his trust into Iago without doing his own investigations. And so lives in a misery of ignorance. Sidney pointed out, and I thought this was really interesting, that Othello is actually creating situations in his mind, and creating his own jealousy and his own anger, and still he is ignorant to the actual truth. So I think that what Shakespeare's saying here is that ignorance is not necessarily bliss, right? Because then you're allowing yourself to be tormented by things that aren't even really true, and then you create those situations that aren't actually existing and torment yourself even more. And there was one other thing that I wanted to just quickly mention. It was Madison. Madison mentioned that Othello has a weakness, right? It shows his weakness. And, you know, every tragedy has a hero with a tragic flaw. It's hubris, right? A tragic flaw. And Othello has one too. So what is his tragic flaw? Okay? What does he become consumed with? And what is that tragic flaw that eventually brings his whole entire downfall? And you can argue it could be different things, but obviously the jealousy that is created within him in creating these stories with Iago certainly leads to his downfall. So, you know, what is his tragic flaw? Something to think about there. And then you can even compare his tragic flaw in the play and investigate that when we get to our literary analysis, and then look at how they present it in the film O. So you could do that too. So I just wanted to make those notes about y'all's discussion board last week. I'll be entering those grades today. And, you know, you should be finishing the play this week. Well, actually, you should have technically finished it last week, but this week you're taking part in your final discussion forum on the play. And so, you know, feel free to bring in anything from this video that you want to there as well. And maybe I'll see some of you guys in person on Friday. I'll be there right at the beginning for the showing of O if you would decide to attend. You need to be here at by 9:30 in Waller, room 124. And I will check in with you guys next week. Have a great rest of your week.